Buenos días a todos y
Good
todas.
morning, everyone.
Para mí es un placer estar en este
For
evento de
me,
lanzamiento al desarrollo
it's a pleasure
para
to be
abrir
in
las
this event
oportunidades a la inclusión
to
económica de
talk
Venezuelanos
about the
en Colombia.
challenges and the opportunities for the inclusion of Venezuelans in
Mi nombre es
Colombia.
Stephanie López, soy consultora para el Center for
My
Global
name is
Development
Stephanie
and
Lopez. I'm
Refugees
a consultant for the Center for Global Development and Refugees
Este
International.
evento se planeó pues
This
en los
event
últimos años el colapso económico,
was
político y
planned
social de Venezuela ha
because in the last few
llevado
years,
a
the
más de 5
economic
millones
and
de
political
buscadores de
collapse in
refugio
Venezuela has
en el
pushed
extranjero
more than 5 million
alrededor
Venezuelans
de
to
las
look for
instituciones y
protection
regiones de
in
Venezuela.
the
Colombia
outside of
es
Venezuela.
el país que
With
más
almost
recibido
1.7
venezolanos
million Venezuelans in Colombia, is the country
de
that
los países
has
del mundo.
welcomed the
A
most
pesar de la generosa respuesta de
Venezuelans, the
Colombia
most
y su
displaced Venezuelans.
esfuerzo para integrarlos en su economía y sociedad,
Even with
cientos de miles de
Colombia's
venezolanos aún presentan
generous
dificultades
response,
legales,
hundreds of
políticas
thousands of
y
Venezuelans
morales
still
para
have
buscar oportunidades.
legal and practical
Esta
difficulties to
situación
obtain
está
formal
complicada a
work.
causa de los efectos
This
económicos
situation
del
has been
COVID-19,
intensified by the economic effects of COVID-19,
a los cuales los venezolanos han sido particularmente vulnerables.
to
Este
which
evento
Venezuelans have
fue
been
organizado
particularly
por
vulnerable to.
y el Center for Global
This
Development
event was organized by Refugees International and Center for Global Development and is part of the
nos vamos
initiative
a enfocar
of
en
Let
el
Them Work.
estatus de la inclusión económica
And
en
we're going to
Venezuela.
focus on discussing the
Algunos
status of
casos
economic inclusion of
demostrados
Venezuelans in Colombia,
así como sus posibles
the potential benefits
soluciones
of
en el
this,
marco de la
and
pandemia.
the
Tenemos
possible solutions
dos
in the
invitados
context of the
especiales que
pandemic.
discutirán
We have some guests,
cuál es la dinámica para los
some great
venezolanos en
guests that
Colombia,
will
cuál ha sido un
discuss
poco la
in
respuesta que
depth
se ha
what is the
implementado
dynamic for Venezuelans in
y
Colombia, has been the
las
response
posibles
that has been implemented,
soluciones
and the
de
possible solutions
oportunidades y desarrollo para
that
todos.
could generate opportunities
Quisiera
and
ahora
development for
presentarles
everyone.
la
I would
agenda
now like
del
to
evento de hoy.
share the agenda
Em,
for today's event.
Tendremos como un mensaje de bienvenida por Helen Dempster.
We
Luego
will have
tendremos la presentación de su
an
estudio
introduction by
por
Helen
Migrant.
Mexer, then we'll have the
Luego el
presentation
gerente de
of our
frontera
study by
Lucas
Marta
Gómez nos dará
Guerrero.
un
Then
mensaje. Y luego
the
tendremos
Borders
un panel
manager Lucas
formado
Gomez
por
is
cuatro
going to
personas.
give us a message, and we have a
Del
panel
Banco
made
Mundial,
up of four
Freddie
people:
Layton
Taimour
del
Samad from the
FMI,
World Bank, Freddie Layton from
Ana
Sunshine
Duran,
Bouquet,
que es la jefe de
Ana
misiones del
Duran,
OIM en Colombia,
the
y Tony Vitola,
OEM's mission chief in
para
Colombia, Antonio
abrir
Vitola.
el panel a preguntas
And
y
then
respuestas.
we'll open for a Q&A
Las
session,
invito a todas a participar
and I urge you all to invite
en
in
Twitter
the YouTube channel's
con el
chat
hashtag
on Twitter
CDG Talks si tienen
too
alguna pregunta
with
para
the
el panel
hashtag
de hoy.
CDG Talks if you have a question for one of the
Habiendo
panelists.
dicho esto, quiero darle la
Having said this,
palabra a Helen.
I want to
Helen
uh,
es la directora asistente
introduce Helen.
y asociada
Helen is the
para la
Assistant
política de
Director
migración
and
desde
Senior
Colombia
Associate for
y
Immigration Policies and
del
Displacement
Center for Global
and
Development.
Humanitarian Policy for the Center for Global Development.
Ella
Before
hace
working for
25
the
años
CGD, she worked for 5 years
Overseas Development
in the
Institute
ODI,
y
Overseas
International
Development
Growth
Institute,
Center.
and the International Growth Center.
Tiene una
Helen
maestría en
has a master's
alta
degree
economía y política del
in
desarrollo del MIT,
data
Master en
economy
Análisis
and
de la
development policies
Universidad
from MIT, and
de
master
Edimburgo
in Africa from
y
from Edinburgh
es
University,
abogada en Derecho, Política
and
Pública y
she's
Relaciones Internacionales
a graduate
de
from
Victoria University
Law of
en
International
Wellington,
Relations from Victoria University in Wellington,
Helen,
New
te
Zealand.
doy la palabra.
Helen, welcome.
Your mic.
Helen, I think you're muted.
I am. There we go. Hello. Thank you very much to Stephanie and to our distinguished panel and all of our participants here today. I wanted to start by setting the scene. So, as many of you will know, the vast majority of the world's 29 million refugees and forced migrants live in low and middle income countries. In general, these countries severely restrict the rights of these people to work, move, and thrive. People are stuck, often for 5, 10 or more years, without the ability to make a living for themselves and their families. Such a policy also means less economic productivity for the host country fewer tax revenues, less social integration, and lower incomes and living standards for both the forced migrants themselves and their host populations. Of course, many people, both in host communities and policymakers, are worried about the impacts of allowing forced migrants to work, move, and thrive. They are concerned about whether such a move will affect the wages their citizens are able to earn, whether it will be a pull factor for future movements, and whether it will affect their ability to access international financing. To try and unpick these issues, the Centre for Global Development and Refugees International have embarked on a new initiative called Let Them Work. This initiative, funded by the IKEA Foundation and the Western Union Foundation, aims to generate evidence on the impacts of expanding economic inclusion and developing policy recommendations for both global and national actors. As you can see from this slide, our work has 3 pillars. The first is our global research and learning pillar. It aims to gather new data to answer some of the big questions I just outlined. Does granting refugees the right to work reduce host community support for those populations, or reduce the amount of humanitarian financing a country can receive? Is the right to work or freedom of movement more important? With such research, we hope we can answer some of these big questions and help guide the discussion at international and national levels. The second is our country level analysis pillar. We are working in 4 countries, Colombia, Peru, Kenya, and Ethiopia, to understand the barriers refugees and forced migrants face in engaging with the labor market, the impact of these barriers on these populations and host communities, and the factors that have led to such policy positions. Today, you will hear the results of our work in Colombia, and we have also published work on Peru, with our work on East Africa coming later this year. And finally, our third pillar is our work on private sector outreach. Businesses operating in refugee hosting countries are very important actors. They can hire refugees, support refugee-owned businesses by providing financing and integrating them in their supply chains. And they can promote the positive benefits of engaging with forced migrant populations. But too often these businesses are left out of policy discussions or don't have the information they need to make the business case for policy changes. We hope to work with businesses, providing them with that information so that they can push for progress. I hope this has been a useful overview of the work we are conducting together and that it's provided some context to you around the presentations you will hear today. If you want more information or to get in touch, please do message myself or Martha or Stephanie on the call today, or head to our website. I look forward to the discussion and many thanks to all of you for being here.
Muchas gracias, Helen, por la presentación del proyecto.
Thank you very much, Helen, for introducing the project. Now, I would like to welcome Marta Guerrero. Marta is a program associate for Refugees International, and her work is focused on precisely widening the access to the labor market for refugees. Marta graduated from Georgetown University with a master's in external service, foreign service, sorry, and she has worked in the development and humanitarian issues. She has worked for the OIM, the Organization of American States, and she's originally from Tampico, Mexico. She received her degree in international businesses from the Tecnológico de Monterrey. Marta, go ahead. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you to all the panelists for being with us here today to discuss a topic as important as the inclusion of the Colombia. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. I have a presentation for all of you. because today we're going to discuss the results of a study that we carried out in Colombia titled From Displacement to Development, how Colombia can transform the Venezuelan displacement into shared growth. And besides this study, we carried out an analysis on the impact of COVID-19 on the economy and the economic integration of Venezuelans in Colombia. And besides this study that you can look at the page of Center for Global Development and Refugees International, in the study, what we did was to analyze the status of the economic integration of Venezuelans in Colombia and the benefits of integrating them into the economy. So, giving you a little bit of context, currently there are 5.4 million people, 5.4 million displaced Venezuelans around the world. The Venezuelan displacement is the second biggest one after Syria's. And out of these 5.4 million Venezuelans, 1.7 million are currently located in Colombia. And this has been very challenging for the government in Colombia and the actors in Colombia because Venezuelans arrive with a lot of vulnerabilities and they're in the need of international protection. But even with these challenges, the Colombian government has been very generous in their response and they have been able to regularize 770,000 Venezuelan immigrants in the country. But even with all of this proactive response of integrating them and giving them work status, the Venezuelan immigrants face a lot of barriers, legal ones, administrative ones, social ones, and structural ones that limit not just their economic inclusion, but that determine the way in which they can integrate into the Colombian work market. Some of these barriers are the difficulty in verifying their credentials or their professions to get jobs that require studies, for example, the lack of financing for entrepreneurs or those with small businesses, the concentration of Venezuelan immigrants in areas that have few work opportunities for them and the local people, discrimination and xenophobia that is rising in the country, and a lack of information from the employers on how to hire Venezuelans and integrate them into the workforce. These and other barriers have limited how the displaced Venezuelans have integrated the Colombian labor market. Besides these barriers, aside from these barriers, there have been many positive steps. There has been more access to regularization through permits that not just regularize the status of Venezuelans, but that they authorize them to get formal work and get basic services like education or health, particularly the permanency special permit or PEP and the special permit of permanency to foster formal work. And I would like to talk about the strategy of income generation. This is a strategy that the Colombian government developed. It identifies the barriers that don't allow Venezuelans to have access to the Colombian economy, and they tell you how to overcome those barriers and push for the economy to be better for both Venezuelans and Colombians. And lastly, I would like to highlight a lot of programs, the response to the Venezuelan displacement, the donations, the government to work to better the lives of Venezuelans in the country. Besides, or even though with all these steps, there are still a lot of gaps. It's important to mention that the study was done before the pandemic and before COVID, but the results are still valid. Maybe these gaps are even greater now. The world and Colombia is going into a crisis right now. First off, we find that regularization is an important requirement to promote formal work, but it's not the only one. This won't guarantee them joining the formal work market. We saw it in 2019. Only 12.3% of Venezuelans with PEP had a formal job. And before 2019, before COVID, we found that Venezuelans had higher unemployment rates than Colombians. 16% of Venezuelans were unemployed compared to 10% of Colombians. And we found that Venezuelans found themselves working in informal work. 7% of Venezuelans were working in the informal sector compared to 58% of Colombians. Besides this, there was a disparity in terms of the income between Venezuelans and Colombians. Venezuelans receive 3% less income than their Colombian peers. This disparity is even greater when we talk about Venezuelan women who
Primera vulnerabilidad es debido a su estatus como venezolanas, lo que limita sus ingresos, y su segunda vulnerabilidad es su estatus
and their second vulnerability is that they're women, because that adds additional barriers on their integration into the Colombian economy. And the displaced Venezuelans in Colombia have a risk of suffering from exploitation and abuse in the sector in which they work. In the study, what we found in terms of the income gap, these income gaps are even higher when we speak about Venezuelans with a university of postgraduate degree, which indicates a high level of sub-employment and a lack of making use of the human capital that displaced Venezuelans bring to Colombia. We found that Colombians with a university degree earn 144% more than Venezuelans with the same studies, and Venezuelans with university degrees or postgraduate degrees have a
sector informal. Esto nos indica que hay un grado
probability of working informally. So this lets us know that there's a high level of sub-employment where you have people with a high level of education working in positions that, for example, you have doctors working as taxi drivers or people with master's degrees at a restaurant or selling things on the street. So there's a mix of human capital that could help the Colombian economy a lot. But what happens with COVID? COVID created a crisis within the crisis that we had in Colombia. It has created a global recession, and in case of Colombia, the Monetary World Fund said that there was going to be a drop in GDP of almost 7.8% for Colombia. In June of 2020, we saw almost 20% of unemployment. In June 2019, it was 10.5%. So we see an impact in the work market for Colombians and Venezuelans. This situation is even worse for Venezuelans due to their situation before COVID that limited their ability to adapt to these economic shocks. And as a result, we see that 85% of Venezuelan households in Colombia have food needs. 68% need to cover the rent and 44% needs access to
100,000 venezolanos han decidido retornar a su país. ¿Cómo esto se ve?
100,000 Venezuelans decided to go back to their country. How does this reflect the work market? So what we did was to look at what sector gathered the Venezuelans in Colombia. And unfortunately, we saw that Venezuelans displaced in Colombia worked mainly in those sectors that were mostly impacted by the pandemic. For example, restaurants, hotels, the manufacturing sector, sectors that hire employees informally. And that's where you have the higher concentration of Venezuelans. We found that 64% of Venezuelans works in these sectors that are highly impacted by COVID. compared to 47% of Colombians. So what happens when these sectors suffer from economic weakness, and when they close their doors, they fire people, they close down, or they might fire some people. Unfortunately, the displaced Venezuelans, due to their immigration status and lack of job security, are the first ones to lose their jobs when businesses go through economic hardship, like the one we see with COVID now. And this is even more predominant between Venezuelan women. Almost 80%, 78% are working in these sectors that are highly impacted compared to 57% of Venezuelan men. And it's important to mention that Venezuelan women are 52% of the population in Venezuela. So we see that this affects the negative adaptation levels, for example, prostitution, children work, and the lack of food security. So it's really important to deal with this. We knew, and we knew before COVID, that the integration of migrants and Venezuelans refugee has the potential of generating a lot of benefits, shared benefits, not just for the development of Colombia, but for the betterment of the quality of life of the displaced in Colombia. Why? Because those who are displaced, when they can join the economy and work, they not only can meet their needs and be self-sufficient, but also contribute in a better way to the Colombian economy. In fact, last year, even with the existing barriers, the International Monetary Fund calculated that the Colombian displacement has an impact on the GDP. Imagine if they didn't have any limitations and they could integrate the economy like the Colombians do. What would we see? If there weren't any barriers to the inclusion of Venezuelans, we would see a monthly raise in their income from $131 to $186, and that would be reflected on the GDP with a growth of $1 billion to Colombia's GDP. We would also see a growth of that would go from almost 300,000 to 450,000, which would reduce the competition from informal work and the contributions to the pension system. We would see more self-sufficiency. By Venezuelans, they could reduce their vulnerability and have a better life. And businesses would get a lot from this because they could get highly trained human capital that complements the abilities of Colombians, and it can help alleviate the lack of workers for some positions, and they can generate connections for future business. These benefits, we can see them even more if we prioritize the inclusion of those highly educated women. In the case of women, we see that if we solve the issues of gender, nationality, the income of Venezuelan women would rise 191%. This is very important, and it's important to try to get these benefits, which would give a better condition to the women that are suffering the most right now. How can Colombia achieve this? Not just to have better conditions for those displaced, but create an opportunity of growth for the whole country. First off, we recommend the Venezuelan government to maintain a constant regularization process that is undetermined by the day in which they came in or a limit on their stay. And it's important that this strategy to be able to be implemented and the barriers that were identified and the actions recommended to be developed in the public policy context. It's important to take action to adapt to accept the university credits that they had in Venezuela and Colombia. The flow of immigrants has provided a great challenge, but it has given a big opportunity to have a better life and create shared development for Colombia. I finish with this. Thank you very much, and I'll be on the lookout for your questions. Thank you, Marta, for such a complete presentation. For those of you who want to look at the reports that Marta showed you during the presentation, we're going to provide the link on YouTube so you can look at them. And if you have any questions, you can ask them through the YouTube chat or through Twitter using hashtag CDG Talks. Now, I would like to invite Lucas Gomez to talk to us, and I want to thank him for accepting the invitation to the talk we're having today about the access. Lucas Gomez is the manager of the border between Colombia and Venezuela, where they coordinate the governmental response to the migration flow coming from Venezuela at a national and local level, and the efforts of different actors and organizations of civil society. He worked in the Ministry of Foreign Relations and for international organizations like OIM and the Council for Refugees and the Program of the United Nations for Development. Lucas studied at the La Rochelle University in France, where he studied geography and history. Sciences Po in France, where he got a master's degree in compared politics and a doctorate in political sciences from the Universidad Externa. Lucas, thank you for being with us in this space. Go ahead.
Muchas gracias. Un saludo muy especial para todos. Créanme que para mí es un placer estar aquí.
It's a pleasure for me to be with you today, representing the presidency of the Republic with this slogan, "The future is for all of us," and that includes our immigrants from Venezuela, and that's our vision. I want to thank and recognize Refugee International and the Center for Global Development for the reports that they just presented, and also for the commitment they've had with this particular issue in our country, the integration of Venezuelans to our economy, because maybe one of the most important elements is that Colombia is facing this topic by constructing something that is very important that we all understand. We are talking about one of the best examples of how to implement state policies that transcend government. And we are thinking that our logic of open arms to our Venezuelan sisters and brothers is to receive them in our territories, because we understand the difficulties that they're facing at the other side of our borders. And we can't just stop there. The report shows one of the most important and more significant tasks to have the state action to integrate most of all that are here and participating here and in our YouTube channel, is that we're interested and concretize that door that we many times mention, but not always work on. Immigration is an opportunity. And for that to be real, we have to integrate, because we maintain our open arms policy and we integrate that population. As it was said in the other presentation, Colombia is going to grow, and that is our proposal, and that is our commitment. The economic inclusion component is one of the most important pillars in this policy. For the integration, economics, and social integration of the population. And we're going to see a very important situation about regularization. We understand that we have to continue with humanitarian attention, and that has to have a projection towards inclusion. We are hoping for that. It's difficult to study because the migration of people that are entering Colombia has not stopped. It's not like today we're going to work with that 1.7 million people that are already in our territory right now, but we have to keep working with those people, but we also have to regulate, and also all the population that is coming into our territory. So that humanitarian attention is still at work. We have to deal with safety, and that is very important to us for that integration. And of course, there are certain dynamics that we have to work on. And finally, the economic inclusion that becomes a long-term plan. Issues about employment, entrepreneurship, formation, and convalidation, which is so important for that population, financial inclusion. We want to include all of these dynamics in the sustainable development measures, dignified work, social and private sectors, and regional economic development. The Venezuelan population in our country, we want to keep working with them and have that local and regional economic development. And as it was mentioned in the prior presentation, we have to think that there is a logic of coordination from the state and the government, but there are also other elements that will allow us to better understand what is happening with that population. So what are the challenges that we are facing? It's a population that are looking for a refugee condition, but the most important thing and the largest door is to look for a way to manage with the regular and irregular population. We have to look for massive regulation measures. We don't want that to be the only barrier that they have when they want to be part of the labor market. But that's what the employers are telling us in order to integrate them into the labor market. There's also an issue on violence based on gender, and that is part of the report. So women face barriers based on their gender
En temas de empleabilidad,
and also as migrants. We have to protect them from exploitation, sexual and labor. And that is the position of all of us that are here in our territory. And we want to eliminate abuses. And we are at a moment that is very particular, where we have to be very clear in what we're doing so that we can deal with xenophobia.
Para nosotros la discriminación no es buena, ni siquiera cuando es
I've
positiva.
said this in many scenarios. We have to work and we have to move towards integral integration without stigmatization. In the work inclusion, there are certain benefits that are part of the report, and I just want to go over them briefly. Diminish the socioeconomic vulnerability of the migrant population. Our largest objective and most important objective is that it can be seen as an opportunity and truly be an opportunity. The second thing is that we want to raise the consumption of services and products. When we have that productive migration, we are going to have the necessary conditions so that perceptions of people that think that migration is a burden does not continue. And I want to say something that is very important to me. Finally, we have to understand the conditions whereby Colombia has opened its arms to migrants. We had 150,000 migrants regularly in our territory. We are now reaching 2 million foreigners, and more than 50% are in an irregular status. So this is a big challenge for our institutions on how to integrate the population and how to establish the policies that will allow us to have control, but also the possibility to help them better and to have better policies. And what do we want? We want inclusion of this migrant population because we are sure that for our businesses and private sectors, there are very important benefits. The profiles, the professional profiles, and the formation that we have provide important benefits. Even in those sectors in which Colombia is developing. So that is important for us. From the presidency, we've been working to reactivate the economy with the migration. We want to work with that benefit, with that migration, to identify that there is a population that is very important and are qualified and very qualified that can contribute to our economic development. Of course, we also need temporary labor. And as I was working with the Minister of Labor in Colombia, they were telling us that in our coffee sector could not have been harvested if we did not have migrants. And that's an indicator for us that we need to have systems that organize our policies from that perspective, station and temporary labor. We want to contract migrants, and that will allow us to lower desertion and rotation rates of personnel. If you give them the opportunity, they are going to stay at their jobs, and that allows us to do better. And something that is very important is that we have to improve the image and reputation of a business. We're talking about sustainability. So there is this larger objective that we want to show the benefits of how the migrants can contribute to our economy. Now here I have an example that is very significant. We are working a little bit with those special permanency permits. So we have regular and irregular population, and what's the access to being considered a regular part of our population. So we have this special permanency permit that will lead to regularization so that the population that is in irregular status that has been identified can access a job, a formal job, and regularize their migration status. When we look at the numbers, we might say that it's not the most efficient in the impact that we've had, because really when we look at the amount of permits that have been offered, we're talking about 10,000, something like that. That's some 800,000, from 800,000 people in irregular situation, or 500,000 might seem not large enough, but something that was part of
en la comunicación con la empresa.
the report, we have to be more assertive to understand this dynamic. It is allowed today, it is allowed that we can provide these provisional permits and permanent.
Tenemos que avanzar en algo que para Colombia
Very
es
important.
una herramienta muy significativa en definición de políticas. Y nosotros tenemos
For
aquí un sistema
Colombia, this is a very important and significant tool. It's a platform to allow us to certify foreign workers in the country. Now we have some 6,000 plus businesses registered, and we also have, and these businesses have said that they want to hire foreign employees and that they already have foreign employees in their personnel. And 63% of the 40,000 registered foreign laborers are Venezuelan. These are small examples that are part of our larger objectives. And before I go into the challenges, this is an obsession of mine, and this is about the people that are in the public employment agencies. How are they talking to people, giving them information and putting them to work? We have more than 100,000 people that are registered to this, have received information on the actions that we pursue, but the results are very low because we have to institutionally offer responses, and I've said this many times with our associates and allies. The work that we have is to make it easier for employers and for migrants, and that is a big challenge, and we have to find our way. And the percentage of people that are in positions, and I want to finish here so that we can have discussions. Colombia has certain challenges and priorities. We want to raise the regularization rates. There is no country that is viable with the regularization rates that we have right now. So we have to recognize migration services in Colombia because we are looking for long-term solutions. We also want to mitigate xenophobia and reduce anti-integration manifestation that's going to allow us to have presentation cards to showcase migration. We're going to work on that. We are working on that. The pandemic has made us revise many of our policies and change the paths that we're going on. And we are working from the Border Patrol on this. We have to articulate the attention plans to reduce poverty. We want sustainable growth and development. And that includes not only aligning goals, but also connecting objectives versus the transformational goals for sustainable development. And we are convinced that productive migration will allow us to do this. And the last one, which is one of the most important, is the implementation of the economic inclusion strategy, as well as the generation of income and revenue. We are working with our allies. We are advancing in this work of integrating in a socioeconomic way and allow them to generate income and generate revenue. We are going to work with all of you that are here with us and to look for solutions and a better integration. As I said, Colombia is opening its arms and will continue to open its arms to this population. We will look to integrate this migrant population, and we are convinced that we'll grow when we are able to do so. Thank you so much. And I am ready to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much for your presentation and for the comments. About the report that we presented, I would like to give our panel, where we have four participants, and I'm going to present them so we can have a conversation. Our first participant is Ana Duran. She is the director of the OEM director. She is graduated from the Costa Rican University. She has worked as the legal director in migration in the migration office, and she has been by minister of government and police in her country. She works with the OAM. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for being with us in this space to talk. As a second participant, we have Taimour Samad, who is the leader for sustainable development for the World Bank for Colombia and Venezuela. He is American and has a degree from MIT, and she has been working in this bank since 2001 in transportation and urban development, and more recently as the leader of the sustainable development in the office of Jakarta. He is responsible for coordinating different projects of environment, urban development, agriculture, among others. And he is leading sustainable development to the agenda of the bank. Thank you so much, Taimour, for accepting our invitation to be part of the panel. Then we have Freddie Layton. Freddie is an engineer, industrial engineer from the Universidad Libre de Colombia. He works at Sunshine Bouquet, and 3 years ago, he became the organization director of the company, which has more than 18,000 employees, and he has the inclusion and integration efforts that has integrated more than 3,000 laborers in the area of Cucuta. Has worked in TENS and Migración Colombia in different events. Welcome, Freddie. Thank you for accepting this invitation, and tell us a little bit about the experience you've had as you hire Venezuelan migrants. And last but not least, we have Tony Vitola. He's an economist from Universidad Central de Venezuela. He's a political consultant, and he has been working with the integration of the Venezuelan migrants in Colombia, working with different projects to strengthen relations in Antioquia and in Red Venezuela. Thank you, Tony, for being here and talking to us. And after these brief presentations, I would like to start by asking something that any one of you can answer. From your point of view, what do you think are the most important challenges that Venezuelans are facing to access the formal employment market? Ana, you can start. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I say hello to all of the members of the panel. especially Lucas, and I want to say thank you to Refugee International and its partners for this initiative. I want to first talk about the numbers that were mentioned in the report. More than 1.7 million Venezuelans are in Colombia. 44.9% are in an irregular status, regular, and 51.9 in irregular status. And this presents different challenges. And although we've had several efforts that have been undertaken by the government and the territory authorities, as well as the allies that are part of our response to accompany all of these integration processes, for this sector, it's very much difficult because of they are at an irregular status. That is a barrier to public services like health and education, entrepreneurial opportunities, social integration, etc. And as I was saying, Colombia has been a country that has been an example of an exceptional example among all of the countries that open their arms to these populations. And I want to point out some examples and information that might show us, give us some information um, of, of the employment market. We had survey in Colombia with 3,000 plus households. 47% of migrants are inactive economically. The informality or the informal status is part of this problem for Colombians as well as Venezuelans. The survey also showed that in general terms, the market participation of migrant is 53%. So if they don't have an access to formal work, has an impact on the population. 96% of them cannot get services. The situation is even more complex because many sectors do not have the information to know about hiring immigrants. Another important point is related to the convalidation of credentials. This is very important. This is very difficult in regular times, but in the case of Venezuelan immigrants that they cannot get those credentials, it's even more difficult. And that limits their access and their integration to the society, the Colombian society. So we have to develop mechanisms to make it easier for them to get certified. And of course, to deal with the costs of these processes, they have to be lower. In terms of hiring from employers, as our presenters mentioned before, there's also an issue of lack of information and the fact that they cannot have, for example, a savings account makes it more difficult to pay them. And on this, many Venezuelans that have a permanent or a permanency in Colombia have mentioned that there's still a barrier when you're going to open a bank account. And I also want to talk about the access to public security or safety agencies that provide health and education and other basic services. And I would say that I would finish this to referring to one of the biggest and most important challenges is xenophobia, because we have to remember that 1.7 million um, immigrants have been generating a particular interest. As we have always recognized, Colombians have been generous. They have opened their arms to their fellow um, South American neighbors, and there has been xenophobia. There's this sense that they come to take our jobs away and our resources away, even though we have studies that show that that is not so. And lastly, in relation to what Marta Guerrero mentioned, in terms of including women, all of the answers and projects that we manage have as a first issue the vulnerabilities of different populations, women, teens, children, etc. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Ana, por tus aportes en este sentido. Has mencionado varias cosas que también
Thank you. You have
mencionaba
mentioned several
Lucas,
things
pero
that were
adicionalmente
mentioned by
también la
Lucas,
irregularidad
but
y cómo
specifically the
la
irregularity
social
issue
impacta
and the
sobre
social
la
protection
población.
system
Eh,
and how it
Adicional,
works for
antes de
Venezuelans
pasarle la
in our
palabra
country.
a Taimour, recordándoles que tienen 2 a 3 minutos
I want to
para
remind you that you have 2 to 3
formular
minutes
otras preguntas.
each so we can
Adelante.
answer other questions. Taimour, go ahead. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you to all of my colleagues here who have said everything before me. I want to say hi to Lucas and various colleagues that I haven't met before. And I want to thank you for this space and this exchange of ideas about a very important topic for all of you and the World Bank too. I think that you have said a lot about uh, Marta, Lucas, and Ana. You have said a lot about this question of this uh, starting question about what are the challenges for the economic and work integration of Venezuelans in Colombia. I want to talk about some things in more detail. The topic of regularization is very important. It's also important to mention that what we considered and what we've heard and noticed is that the variability in this migratory status of the population and the lengths of stay that they provide and the available instruments create uncertainty between employers, making training more difficult for foreigners. Even if I have a PEP and I have a permit for 2 years, an employer could have questions in their midterm and long-term planning when training people due to the uncertainty of their status. And this leads us to one of the points that Lucas mentioned in terms of having more regularized workers or giving longer terms. We recognize the difficulties in terms of the economic policy, and thank God I'm not in those shoes that I have to make those decisions. But I think it's very important to look at the issue of security, of time, to incentivize the employers to invest in this population. I think that another thing that is very important to mention, and maybe we didn't go so much into detail, are the difficulties that the population faces to validate their studies in Colombia. We have a high percentage of people with an academic degree, and it's 10% more for Venezuelans in different levels of education and Venezuelans with postgraduate degrees, secondary degrees, different types of licenses, but that potential is not being utilized at its most or at its best potential. Venezuelans with a university degree or a master's degree or doctoral degree have a 358% more chance of working on informal work than the rest of their Venezuelans. This is due to the difficulty to validate their titles or degrees. 14% of Venezuelans compared to 5% of Colombians with university degrees or postgraduate degrees are working on basic jobs. So there's a that's different compared to other migrations and other in other regional contexts and other regions around the world. There is a population with a level of abilities and training that has to be made use of, and validating their degrees is key. The government is working on this, but we need to look for better strategies and we need to focus on tackling that issue and using this human capital. Another topic that we would like to talk about here is that maybe the need of having more customized strategies at a territorial level to match between skills and needs. It's a huge country and there are local labor markets that are different from others and different populations with different skills. So I think we need to look into at the department level or municipality level to identify strategies to match people with work and train them in the skills necessary for the jobs available in that area to have this match between the needs they have and the tools available. I think that it's done in many places around the world in the framework of local skills development. It's one of the challenges among the many in Lucas's and the government's list of challenges that we consider important. We spoke about the social barriers, but it's very important to mention that in all these and social careers, we don't have a magic wand to solve it, but the social networks are very important to foster the access to labor markets in many parts around the world, in communities that where the social network has suboptimal uh, development, the opportunities on flow. When people are connected through social networks, they get better work opportunities. We need to look for mechanisms to tackle this deficit of a social network to access job opportunities or the work market, maybe through more innovative technologies, digital platforms. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I think it's important. And lastly, in the social aspect, I think it's important to recognize, due to reasons that we can understand, the rise in disagreement of populations in different sectors of the Colombian population. There's some animosity. Around 67% of Colombians had a non-favorable vision of Venezuelans, of receiving Venezuelans, social and economic, and this has risen last year to 81%. So all the work that they're doing and that Lucas mentions, tackling these prejudices and these misconceptions that are not empirically informed is very important. And in all of these different aspects, among others, we're proud of tackling this problem, and we're available to help the government and support the government. Thank you, Taimour, for your idea. I would like Freddie to tell us about his experience and the barriers that people face to be hired. Freddie, go ahead. I agree with the other colleagues in the panel. Many years ago, the main barrier was to have a document. There's an effort.
Freddie, go ahead.
This has worked well for us at the beginning. We hired someone, and when we wanted to renew them, we couldn't because the PEP lasted less time. Now, the process is faster and we're not having so much problem. And the 2-year duration in our sector has worked very well. And we have people that have been working with us for 3 years and they're going to continue working with us. The next barrier that I consider that we should work on as a country and as employers is validating degrees. I have people that have the studies, that have the capacity and the talent to work as mechanics. And in Colombia, you need to have a certification to do that work. So if I have that person that has the studies, has the skills, but I can't let them work because they haven't that degree validated in Colombia, that's a problem. So we need to do something that doesn't require so much paperwork. They tire the collaborators and they have to do some works in another place and with a lesser salary.
Because that is a barrier for that will not allow to grow. The third thing is that we should think about pensions. Pensions for these people. They are paying for the system, for the pension system in Colombia, but with the requirements that we have right now, many of them are not going to get a pension, specifically more those that are 40, 45 years or older, especially in private enterprise. Let's say if they have a good pension history so that at the end of their career, this does not become a problem for us or for them. And I don't know anything that is being done. And I think Lucas can help us with that to see what we're going to do about that topic, because they are contributing to the system, but they're not going to be able to get it back. And the other barrier that is very important for the sector, the private sector, to deal with is that if we don't participate, and that requires an effort, that we do this as a social work, and the businesses that have worked with us know that we don't receive that much benefit aside from the work of the people, but in our programs, we go to the border, we get the people, we pay them, we give them a living space, we feed them. That is a social cost, and the private sector needs to generate this type of program so that we can include a lot more people from the border and from the interior. We don't even have to go to the border to look for them as we used to do years ago, and we still do it more as a social responsibility. and entrepreneurial responsibility, and because of a commitment that we have with the border to undertake this program. And we can't stop doing it now because it's a program that makes us proud. And the other barrier, which is xenophobia, has we would been able to control much of it in our company. That's where we have the barriers, and I see it from the private sector. And we can offer jobs to the population. We worry about them. Thank you so much, Freddie, for your comments. And the social protection system and how it can be adapted to this migration would be important. Now I want to talk to Tony because he has another perspective on how people that are working on their own or trying to open businesses are what their experience is, and your perspective is different. Hello to all of the people that are watching on YouTube, to all the panelists, and I want to say thank you for this initiative. And I am sort of aligned with what other panelists have mentioned. The main barrier that they have is migratory regularization. We have entered into efforts to offer that regularization with permanent permits, but we still have population that cannot access the labor market. Dr. Lucas Gomez mentioned something that is important. It was decreed the last year, the PPF, but I want to compliment a little bit on that topic because even though it's a very important tool that allows this irregular population that does not have a passport or the requirements needed to access PEP, the Colombian government saw that this permit was very impacted by the pandemic. I know that this was offered before the quarantine, the restrictive quarantine that started at the end of March, and that obviously changed their priorities for so many of the businesses about regularizing their migratory status because this permit was not presented properly to the businesses and the population, and a lot of Venezuelans don't know this permit. They don't know how to acquire it. And obviously the employers, they have to do the first steps or take the first steps to regularize the people that they want to hire. With the first PEP that was offered in 2017, there was work that had to be done for various months to give them information on how the permit works and what are the reaches of this permit. And I think this new instrument could be very beneficial, but we need to offer the information to the Venezuelans, the Venezuelan population and the employers. There's also another important topic in relation to the special permanence permit that you cannot accumulate years to have a resident visa. So Venezuelans that got the permit on 2017 and renovated on 2019 and are now going to renovate once more this year, according to the Colombian government requirements, they are going to have been in Colombia for 4 years. They have showed they want to stay in Colombia, but it is important that these people can access directly a resident visa so that they don't have to accumulate years through another visa process, and that they can get a permit so that they can get the benefits on this visa. I think this is an important topic. This has to be strengthened. And we have observed that at the beginning of last year, international organizations and local organizations. Many of them are getting the information and are moving towards the integration, the social economic integration. Our alignment has changed from 2017 from humanitarian assistance to integration, but the pandemic led to the fact that many Venezuelans that were integrated in the formal economy lost their jobs and they couldn't pay the rent or access food, or those that were irregular could not work due to the pandemic. And so all of that orientation had to move towards humanitarian help. But according to their occupation and the work that they did from the time that they were in Venezuela, they find limitations to strengthen or promote their credentials and work, or to access credits to finance their businesses. And I think the guidelines have to be geared to help them be entrepreneurs in Colombia, because it's an important capital that we have to help work. Thank you so much. In the second part of our conversation, we have a lot of questions from people. And I think I'm going to start with one that Tony was making reference to, and it's for Lucas Gomez. And the PEP and PEPFF, has this been affected by the pandemic? Has it had an impact on the integration of this population? Precisely because, let's say, there's this questioning. Is there a possibility of permanent regularization, which is what Tony was talking about? Lucas. Thank you, Stephanie. The pandemic brought with it a reconfiguration of everything. From the economic point of view, not just migration, we are in a recession. A lot of people lost their jobs. And that decelerated the permits. What have we seen and what could be hopeful? And I am an optimist. So November and December, we saw an increase of the issuing of permanent permits. So that means that it's working. But Tony said something that is very important. We have to be better from the government by offering those tools to the private sector and the migrants, the immigrants, because they have to understand, and we haven't probably done the best job, they have to know about the efforts that are available, and they have to know that there are mechanisms for regularization. But this tool, PFF, is not an option, but it's not the solution for all problems in regularization. We are working in a better and massive offering for regularization. I said when I first talked to you that we cannot keep going this way. We have to figure out what is the mechanism that will allow us to figure out the barriers that are already, for the people that are already irregular, they don't have a passport. So we have to look for a different document to identify this population, because if we keep asking for the passport, many of these people that are here and continue to reach our territory are going to find it impossible to be part of the regular stream of workers. We need a different vision, and we need massive regularizations. We wouldn't need a special permit, but we would have a policy and a document that would impact massive regularization. And now we have a question from, and I know many of you work on this topic. What is needed to deal with xenophobia, in, including all communities? I would like Anna to answer this question because I know that organization has been working with that in several programs, specifically dealing with discrimination and to decrease the problems of xenophobia. We're listening to you. I'm sorry. Thank you. My microphone was muted. That topic is a concern, a constant concern, and it has not been solved anywhere in the world. So, in the context of crisis, seem to get worse. There's a fear that whoever's coming into my country is going to take away something from me, especially when there's a lot of need. We have done a complementary work to aid the Colombian government preparing campaigns from school age children on so that they can learn. Actually, children don't respond to these differences, but we've talked about integration, to not to discriminate, that there is no difference, to try to help them to understand that there should not be any racism. But also, if there are socioeconomic situations, if they can develop in their communities, these immigrants, that will help the community develop too. Those are really very important issues. And it's this message should get to all areas or segments. And of course, we have to remember that in Colombia, historically, Colombia was an immigrant country, but also the pandemic, the economic crisis that we're facing makes it difficult to communicate this message. But we sincerely believe that we have to call on everyone to understand this issue. And we want to move from the humanitarian message to development, showcase that this migration is regular, is controlled, and it's a benefit to our development in Colombia. We don't want to be leaving anybody behind. We want to continue to stress that message, and we have to understand that we have the advantage that we are societies, very similar societies, with the language and many of our habits, and that should make it easier to create this inclusion. So that would be my message in terms of this specific topic of xenophobia. Thank you, Anna. One last question that we have in the chat, and I think I'm going to assign it to Freddie. You talked about the development, the investment that needed to be done in the private sector in order to be able to integrate this population in the different businesses. And we are getting a question about what is that investment that we need in terms of legal services to support the immigrants and refugees so that they can obtain that permit. Do you think it's linked to misinformation or lack of information? How could we improve it, and what type of investment do we have to make so that we have a better knowledge of all of these legal tools that exist to access the labor market? I think that in this case, the government is offering the conditions to access the permits. Since last year, it has been easier for people to access, even during the pandemic. So I think that the strategy maybe should be, how do we reach the people that need this information? So it's a communication strategy, because with the amount of people that we have that are immigrants and that have been renovating their documents, it has been easier and it works that when they talk to each other in the immigrant community, that's the best communication or strategy. One person does all the efforts and they can tell other people in their community. I do not believe that we need an investment in legal help. It's more about communication and what the government can do to communicate and to talk to those communities. I know each municipality knows where the immigrants are congregating, and as a government, you should go there, and it would be more effective. Something mobile, something that allows us to reach the community and give them the documents right there. But the legal effort is not the issue because that's not really that difficult. Thank you so much, Freddie. Thank you for that idea that you offered us so that Lucas and Anna and all of those that have the resources can take it into account. We only have 5 minutes left, and I would like in these 5 minutes, give a minute to each of you so that you could tell us one best practice or one idea to deal with this issue of inclusion of this population into the economy. Let's start with Tony. I think that one of the most important efforts is to promote and strengthen entrepreneurs, Venezuelan entrepreneurs. I've had the opportunity to participate in projects of this type, and I've seen that they're very efficient in improving the quality of life of the population, and in the future of an indirect population that will access the services from this population. But we have to guarantee that effort among us. The government has done a very important job because Colombia historically has not been receiving immigrants. So I think the effort that has been done is important, but I don't think this applies only to the government. We have organizations, international and nonprofit, that have to work on this issue too. This population intends to stay in Colombia and make it its permanent residence. Anna? Thank you. The work that has been done by the government in terms of dealing with structural barriers are very important, and it's an excellent practice. The documentation process and regularization processes, particularly in what Taimour mentioned, which are initiatives that have been dealt with the allies, which is to have integral action programs to strengthen the labor market. And that is important that we keep in mind. The programs that are being developed with SENA, and as you mentioned, mobiles, we do have that, and it's very important. We want to get more so we can diversify the services that we're providing. Thank you. Freddie? I think that we have to talk to the private sector. Our experience of eliminating one of the most important barriers, xenophobia, because each area we had a migrant, an immigrant worker, and that made a difference. You can get information from the social media or TV or ads, but when they tell you the story of what they lived, and you can see, for example, that there's a difference between their photographs from their passport and now, and they've lost weight. You don't need anything else to be rid of xenophobia. We have in each area an immigrant, and now they're friends with everyone. They are respected. They are loved. And that is a best practice, that in each area of the business you have an immigrant, so that we can get rid of xenophobia. And I am very proud that my business, we have decreased this problem. And that's a great thing, because we want to share this with municipalities, but we know that it's not easy. I want to thank all of you. We're out of time. We could stay here for many hours talking about these issues and sharing our experiences. I want to say thank you to Anna, Lucas, Tony, and Freddie, and all of the team for the project. Martha, I want to thank you for being with us today, and we hope that we can continue with these conversations more often that help the private sector as well as international and local organizations, which was our objective for this first meeting. And why I want to thank all of the people that were listening in and watching on YouTube. Thank you for participating on this event, and we hope that we can talk more. Thank you, all of you.